5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey, Shagheads, Curtis Tucker. I am back with my first episode of 2026, back with a new revamped name and logo. Really not that unusual of a name. I have renamed the podcast the Curtis Tucker Podcast. Why? Because it matches my blog, it matches all of my social media accounts, my new Substack, my YouTube channel. So basically everything where I'm kind of doing something is just going to be Curtis Tucker, and then that way it leaves the name Zoinkies to just fit on the clothing store, the Shopify clothing store. So I just got to thinking it didn't make a whole lot of sense to be podcasting as Zoinkies and then copying those podcasts over to my blog called Curtis Tucker. And I finally got, Facebook finally gave me the ability to turn on professional mode on my Facebook page. So I get to shut down all those other Facebook pages, which my original Facebook page is just Curtis Tucker. So everything now matches. So anyway, stick with me. I'll get it all ironed out. I'm getting it ironed out. The plan is to try to get 52 podcast episodes done this year. Can I do it? Can I do it? You guys encourage me, help me. Hit me up at curtis@curtistucker.com or shags@shaggyduck.com. Don't forget, I am Shags because got all that hair there. Anyway, okay, so let's dive into this week's episode. I turned 63 in December, feeling a little bit old, and I'm thinking back, it didn't seem like when I was in my 40s and 50s that things that happened in the 70s were that long ago or that weird. But now that I'm in my 60s and I'm looking back at what happened in the 70s and how different life was in the 70s versus today, especially for kids, I mean, it's completely different. And there's so many things that we did and had and experienced in the 70s, 50 years ago, that kids today or within the last 10, 20 years have no clue. They have no clue of. So that's what I'm going to try to mostly talk about on this episode is what was life like for a kid in the early to mid 70s. Now things started changing a little bit in the late 70s, so I'm going to kind of keep this early to mid 70s, but this is kind of basically what it was like growing up as a kid and how different it was. So I was born in 1962, which meant my entire youth, you know, that you can really remember was from the age 8 to 18 was in the 70s. So I was in the prime area of being a kid in the 70s, and I kind of considered myself a Generation Jones, coming at the very end of the baby boomers. My uncle was a baby boomer born in, I think, 47, and he and I were not the same. Nothing was the same. So I don't feel like I'm a baby boomer. I feel like I'm a Generation Jones. So let's zip back, especially for anybody that's young. If you guys are my age or right around my age, you're going to remember almost everything that I'm talking about. If you're younger, almost everything I'm talking about, you're going to have no clue. You're going to be like, what? So I could have probably added another 100 things to this list, but I'm just going to kind of go with kind of what I have. So back in the 70s when we were kids, and again, this is before driving, before, you know, this is from the 70s all the way up until we basically went from adolescence to adulthood and we started driving and all that. So this is like right before that. So basically in the 70s we rode banana seat bikes, which you don't see as much anymore. A lot of the bicycles nowadays are kind of huffy, BMX type bikes. But in the 70s, almost everybody had a banana seat bike, and we rode those things, and our skateboards. Skateboards were big in the 70s. And so we rode those all over town, and that was our mode of transportation. And basically, once you left the house, your parents didn't know where you were going, how long you were going to be gone, and there was really no way of communicating with them or letting them know where you were. So we would take our banana seat bikes and our skateboards, and we would go miles and miles, you know, all the way to the other side of town. Probably went to a lot of places that our parents wouldn't have wanted us to go to, but there was really no way to track us. We didn't wear helmets. We didn't really wear any kind of pads with skateboards. We just went. And there was no way for our parents to track us if we were not in our neighborhood somewhere or at one of our best friends' houses. They wouldn't be able to find us until we came back. In the summer, basically, it was we got to stay out. Basically, the rule of thumb, you probably heard this a lot, is we got to stay out until the streetlights came on. Well, in the summer, you know, streetlights didn't come on till 9 or a little bit after 9, but, you know, we would push it till about 10 o'clock. And then if you wanted to stay out, play later than 10 o'clock in the neighborhood, you basically had to run into somebody's house, get on the phone, call your parent, hope your sister wasn't on the phone, because if she was, the line was busy. And then you'd have to like ride your bike all the way home, ask if you could stay out later or spend the night with somebody and go all the way back. And so it was kind of a pain, but that's basically the way it was. But if you called and you told your parent, you know, hey, I'm going to be home at 10:30, you know, then they were usually okay with that. And so you got to stay out. But most kids had to go in either at dark or around 10 o'clock, even in the summer. So spending the night was a big deal, especially in the summer, especially on the weekends. And sometimes you would get on a binge and spend the night with the same guy 4 or 5 nights in a row in the summer, or he would spend, you know, you would trade off, and one night you'd spend the night at his house and the next night he would spend the night at your house. On a few occasions, everybody in the neighborhood, like the group of 5 of us, you know, I don't know, thinking back, I don't remember all 5 of us spending the night all together on the same night, but sometimes there would be 2, sometimes 3. So spending the night together was a big deal in the 70s. In the summer or you know, warmer months of the winters, we played outside constantly. There was really not that much to do other than playing outside. A lot of the games that we played tag, hide and go seek, kick the can, games like red light, green light. And then we would make up games. We would combine tag with hide and go seek with kick the can and make up our own games. We spent a lot of time on people's porches. We'd sit on the railing or the big, I don't know, square things and just sit there and watch people go by, watch cars go by. We would tell stories, told a lot of ghost stories. A lot of times if we told ghost stories, we'd move down to sit under a street light somewhere because it'd be a little scarier getting away from a house, but told a lot of ghost stories to try to scare each other. So that was kind of the kid part of running around the neighborhood. Neighborhoods were big. I mean, you usually played with the kids that were within maybe 4 or 5 blocks of your house, and then usually anybody further than that away played in a different group, and then every now and then those groups would combine, but not very often. So luckily for me, there was 5 of us that all lived on West Broadway on the same street, and so we all played together. And then there would be a few other kids on the next street or even maybe the next street that would join in sometimes, but our core group of guys all lived on the same street, all went to the same grade school, and that was our core group. And then back in the 70s, believe it or not, smoking was huge. It seemed like everybody, especially parents, smoked. Movie stars, rock stars, everybody smoked. There was smoking in movies. There was smoking was so prevalent and big. There was cigarette ads in magazines. There were cigarette ads on television, and kids could buy cigarettes. I mean, you weren't supposed to buy cigarettes, but you could. You could go buy cigarettes for your, you know, go in and say, I'm buying this. You know, your parent could be in the car and you could run in and say, hey, my dad needs a pack of Raleigh, and you could take it out to him. But there was also cigarettes in vending machines. So if a kid really wanted to get a hold, or a teenager really wanted to get a hold of cigarettes, you just find a cigarette vending machine and buy them out of there. I remember cigarette vending machines being in hospitals. And that was another deal. You could smoke in hospitals, you could smoke on airplanes, you could smoke in trains, you could smoke in cars, you could smoke in schools, you could smoke in libraries, you could smoke in restaurants, you could smoke freaking everywhere. And my mom was a smoker. So I spent a lot of my childhood trapped in a 67 Thunderbird. Now my mom would be nice enough to crack her window sometimes when she was smoking, but I'm sure I got plenty of secondhand smoke growing up as a kid. Ashtrays were a huge part of the 70s because if you had a parent like mine that smoked so much, they weren't going to carry an ashtray around the house, so you wanted to have an ashtray in a lot of different rooms depending on, you know, what rooms they spent a lot of time in. So we bought a lot of ashtrays in the 70s, and at school, I was in art classes, and so I made a lot of ashtrays, and a lot of other kids made a lot of ashtrays, and we gave our parents those ashtrays as gifts for their birthdays and Father Day, Christmas, things like that. And so anyway, you know, you just kind of grew up with the smell of smoke and cigarette butts everywhere, and that was just a part of the 70s. Cigarettes were a huge part of the 70s. One of the huge differences between the 70s and today was phones. In the 70s, we had what we called landlines, and it was a phone that had to be attached to a wall with a cord, and then you could only go as far as the cord. You could take the phone only, some phones were actually on a wall and you couldn't take them anywhere. Those phones usually had a handle with a long spirally cord, and you would buy as long a cord as you could to get away from whoever might be in the room. But basically you couldn't go more than a room away from wherever the phone was. And most houses back in the 70s only had one phone line until some teenager begged long enough. They might sometimes get their own line, but if a sibling had their own line, there was no way you were using their phone. And so, but that did give you a little more freedom to use the main line. But if somebody was on the phone and one of your buddies called, they would get a busy signal. And if somebody was on the phone, you couldn't call your buddy, and so you had to sit there, and there was no other way to communicate unless you got on your bike and rode to their house. You had to wait it out until somebody got off of the phone. And so it was huge. I mean, completely different. There was no texting, there was just no other way to communicate with your buddies, no computers, nothing like that. And then you paid a certain amount of money a month for a phone line, but if you wanted to make a long distance call, which was basically calling to any other town, you had to pay extra. And those long distance phone calls added up pretty quickly, so you didn't talk to somebody out of town for very long, except after 7, because at 7 p.m. they would lower those long distance rates and it would be cheaper. And so a lot of people talked on the phone after, especially long distance phone calls after 7 p.m., which is kind of crazy to think about. Answering machines, for the first part of the 70s, there were no answering machines. And then the families that did eventually get answering machines, they were basically a little machine. Some of them were a machine with a built-in kind of a robot voice to them. And then a lot of them you could record your own message on a cassette, and then the messages that people left were recorded on these little cassettes. And so that was the answering machine thing back in the 70s. There were payphones. So if you were out somewhere, you were downtown, and you were not anywhere near a house of somebody you knew, you would basically just pop into a payphone. I think it was like 15 cents to use a payphone, maybe a dime. And then one of the tricks that we used to do to avoid the silly long distance phone call is, like, if I was going out of town with a buddy or going to see a buddy out of town and my mom wanted to know that I made it, once I got to my destination, I would call the operator and say I would like to make a collect call to my home. If you made a collect call, that means the person on the other end would agree to pay for the phone call so you didn't have to. So I would call my mom. I would have the operator call my mom and say, you know, something like, Bert Smith would like to talk to you, and that might be the code name. And so as soon as my mom heard Bert Smith, she knew that I was safe, and the operator would say, would you accept a collect call from Bert Smith? And my mom would say, no, I don't know him. And then the operator would hang up, but that way my mom knew that I made it to my destination. So we used to do that quite a bit. I'm sure everybody did that, but that was kind of the whole phone use thing in the 70s. Now TV was a lot different as well. TV basically came with 3 major channels, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and that was really it. Most TVs did not have remote controls, so I remember a lot of times that I would sit in front of the TV on a stool, arm's length away, and I would go, you know, click, 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 between 4, 5, and 9 if I wanted to watch something was on. If my mom hadn't gotten a TV guide, so there was no guide on the television, you had to buy a paper TV guide, which my mom would buy, but sometimes if she didn't have one, I would have to go click, 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 and go between the stations and wait for the commercials to be over just to find out what was on the channel. And then once you decided which of the 3 channels you wanted to watch, you could go sit in a chair. And then if you wanted to change it, you had to get up and change it. TVs were big, they were deep. They had big tubes in them, and they weighed a ton. Early TVs in the 70s were usually in a big console, a big wooden console, and sat on the floor. Sometimes they had little legs on them. They probably weighed 100 pounds. I mean, TVs were way, way bigger back in the 70s. Stations signed off at usually 1 a.m. was usually the latest, so you could not watch TV all night long. There were no 24/7 TV stations. There were no TV stations specified for one genre. You know, there was no news station all night long. There was no MTV station all night long. During the day, TVs mostly showed soap operas. So in the summertime, that's why you went out and played, because there was nothing to watch but soap operas. And as a kid, you did kind of watch the soap opera that might have been on right around your lunchtime if you did come home. All My Children seemed to be like a popular soap opera that some kids watched, and I think it was just because it was on around lunchtime, and you usually wanted to watch TV while you were eating. So if your parent was watching All My Children, or your grandparent, you kind of had to watch it. And so Saturdays were the day that cartoons were on. They weren't really on all throughout the week. Sometimes there was some shows that had a few cartoons on after school, but usually after school it was reruns from shows from the 60s or earlier 70s, Gilligan's Island, Brady Bunch, Leave It to Beaver, Banana Splits, shows like that were on afterwards. But the big day to watch cartoons was Saturday morning. It usually started, I think, around 7. Bugs Bunny was usually on early, and then there was Fat Albert and Pink Panther and Super Friends and Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, which wasn't a cartoon, but there was a lot of Sid and Marty Krofft live action shows like Land of the Lost and shows like that. But Saturday was the big day to watch cartoons, and if you missed them, you couldn't record them. There was no recording devices, and you basically had to wait, you know, until it was a rerun, which could be months and months away. Primetime TV was usually detective shows, tons of detective shows, variety shows. There was a lot of variety shows like Carol Burnett, Sonny and Cher, things like that, and then a lot of sitcoms. And then one sitcom would usually split off into like 4 more new sitcoms based on characters from that one sitcom. When families would get together and eat dinner, if they didn't eat at the dinner table, which we ate at the dinner table a lot in the 70s, but if you wanted to sit in front of the TV, you ate on TV trays. And so I remember using TV trays a lot, and then that led to TV dinners, which we ate quite a few TV dinners. Now, when you ate a TV dinner in the 70s, you had to put it, it was in a foil tray, you had to put it in the oven, and wait like 30 or 40 minutes to bake it in the oven to heat up, because we did not have microwave ovens in the early 70s. And so there was no way of instantly heating anything. Everything was oven on the top of the stove with a pan or in a toaster. And other than that, you were out of luck. So anything else about TVs? That was usually most of the TV stuff. Sports and television. You could watch every major sporting event on one of those 3 channels. There was never an extra cost. There was no pay-per-view, none of that. The Super Bowl was always available to watch. Championship boxing matches were huge, usually on a Friday night. You could watch Muhammad Ali, though all those fights were free back in the 70s. Evel Knievel was considered kind of a sports deal. And if he was jumping something like the Grand Canyon, you got to watch those jumps for free. Monday Night Football kind of changed everything sports-wise, because it was one of the first sporting events that wasn't on the weekend. It was a huge deal in the 70s and made Howard Cosell very famous. So he became a big celebrity because he was one of the announcers on Monday Night Football. Music, most people got their music from radio stations. There was pretty much every town had a local radio station that they listened to. Sometimes the radio station wasn't in your town, but it was in a town close, and it provided news for your area. But people spent a lot of time listening to radio, especially in their cars. And every week we had to listen to the American Top 40 with Casey Kasem. And that was kind of a ritual to see what the top songs were for. If you found a lot of songs that you liked, you didn't want to go buy all of the albums and stuff, you would make a mixtape. And usually the only way to make those tapes was to turn on a tape recorder and record it right off the radio. So I can't, the quality just was awful, but I guess we didn't know any difference, so it wasn't that big a deal. But you would wait till the DJ either told you what song was coming on, or you just took a chance and pushed record. And if it wasn't a song you wanted to record, you'd stop, rewind, and then reset till the next song. But basically that's how we made our mixtapes, is just sitting there for hours and hours waiting on songs to come on. If it was a popular song, they would play it at least once every hour. But if you missed it, if you caught the end of it, you'd sometimes have to wait an hour before they would play it again. But that's how we got a lot of our music on mixtapes. We all had collections of music. Some people, for me, it was 45s in the beginning, and then it was 8 tracks, and then albums, and then cassettes. And that was how we collected our music. You can see I got albums here. I probably had, my biggest collection was albums. They had Columbia House would start everybody out with like 11 albums for a penny. And so that's how you'd get a big collection real quick. And then you had to buy like 1 album a month for a year once you did that, which nobody ever did. And I think that's why they went belly up. But if you wanted to take your music with you, there was very few options. You either took a tape recorder with you and played your tape from a tape recorder. Eventually, towards the mid-70s, we had boom boxes, or you took a transistor radio with you that had battery. Everything had to be battery powered. There was, that was the only way. And they were big. There was no compact, small, until the later 70s when the Walkman came out. But before the Walkman, there just wasn't any easy way to take music with you. So we didn't take music with us too long. Fads were huge in the 70s. See that guy right there, the smiley face? Smiley face was a fad in the 70s. CB radios, we went through a huge CB radio fad. Pet rocks, Rubik cubes, clackers, mood rings, lava lamps, shag carpet, and streaking was even a thing. Streaking, A lot of you younger people have no clue what that is. Basically, for some weird reason, we went through a period where people thought it was funny to take off all your clothes and go run out in public somewhere. And so streaking became a thing. People streaked in major sporting events. They streaked on the Academy Awards, on the stage. It was just, didn't last very long. And then even a very, very popular song called The Streak came out, one of those novelty songs, and that was super popular at the time, but that was just one of those fads. Things that we collected, I don't see kids collecting as many things as we used to in the 70s. Some kids today don't collect anything. In the 70s, we collected baseball cards, comic books, marbles, Hot Wheels, Barbie dolls, troll dolls, basically things like that. Whatever was the current craze, and there was just so many fads and so many crazes that it seems like every kid had 5 or 6 collections of something. And then trading, basically you would get with your buddies and you would trade your baseball cards, or you would trade comic books. And then we would actually play marbles, and if you won or lost and your marbles got kicked out of the circle, you basically lost and gained marbles. And so even though you had really cool collections, most kids were willing to trade and swap. Our bedrooms, we had I think everybody had a poster on the wall of some kind, and the big posters in the day, of course, the one I had was a Farrah Fawcett poster. Had Charlie's Angels. The Dallas Cowboy Cheerleaders was a huge poster. A lot of kids had black light posters. Girls had posters of like David Cassidy and sports figures, but it just seemed like everybody had a poster in the 70s. The black light posters were really cool. If you don't know what a black light poster is, it was kind of a felt, velvety feeling poster, and it had really dark blues and blacks on it, and then some neon looking colors. And when you turned a normal light off and turned a black light on, which was a bulb that looked blue, and it gave off this really weird blue color, and it would make the black light posters really pop, and especially all the colors. Anything that was white really stood out. It almost glowed in the dark. And so black light posters were pretty big in the 70s. Things, you could actually buy things for a penny. So if you were out running around the neighborhood and you literally found a penny on the ground, it was good for something. You'd go to the convenience store. Jolly Ranchers were a penny. Double Bubble bubblegum was a penny. Sixlets, which were these six little chocolate balls, they were a penny. So there was like a whole section in a convenience store of candy, 1 cent candy. And so if you had like 10 cents, you could go in and get 10 different pieces of candy and come out. If you had $1, you literally came out with 100 pieces of candy. I mean, I'm not kidding. It was pretty cool. A couple coins. Yeah, so if you had, like I say, if you had, 50 cents, you had a lot of money in the 70s, especially to buy candy. News and the national mood. There was no 24/7 news on anywhere. I mean, radio wasn't 24/7 with news. It was, now radio did play music throughout the night, but television went off, and there was just no way of getting news 24/7. News came on in specific time slots, in the morning, at lunch, at 5, and at 10. And then other than that, news was not on. If something happened, sometimes they would interrupt a program with a special report, or you would just get your news off the radio. Radio kind of fed news between songs throughout the day. Newscasters just read the news. I mean, there was no spin, there was no pundits, there was no dogging on the other political party. People didn't really think of political parties. I mean, it wasn't that really big of a deal. And so newscasters basically just stuck to talking about the news. In the 70s, though, every newscast, there was always something about the Vietnam War. It ended kind of towards the middle of the 70s. So the early 70s, there was news reports on every day. After it was over, there was still news about it, about the combat vets coming home, and there was protests and all that stuff. And then space travel was huge in the 70s. It seems like we were always sending a space capsule up into space, and a lot of times we were landing men on the moon and they were walking on the moon. It just seemed like it was constantly going on, and that led to a lot of space stuff. Kids drank Tang. It was this orange style drink, and ate space food sticks and played with space toys. So astronauts and NASA and the space program was huge in the 70s. And again, it was kind of a major family event to sit around and watch these rockets take off, watch them splash into the ocean when they landed, or to actually watch moonwalks back in the day. Traveling, you know, if you could afford it, traveling by airplane, airports were a lot smaller, had a lot less terminals back in the day, and you could literally get to the airport 10, 15 minutes before your flight, go right up to the gate and get right on. There was no lines, there was no checking, there was no security. You know, basically your entire family could go with you straight in all the way up to the terminal, and then they could come all the way in when you were returning and get you. So getting through an airport was just real easy. Getting onto a military base, you just drive up and tell them, here you're going to see, and they would just wave you on. And so completely different. And that was traveling. Money shopping and things like that. Fast food back in the day did not take credit cards. And sometimes, like the fast food chains, they didn't even take checks. So basically the only way to pay for food at a fast food restaurant was cash. And I remember the first time I heard that McDonald's and some of the restaurants might start taking credit cards, I thought, why would you ever pay for anything, especially food, fast food, with a credit card? And there was no such thing as a debit card. So none of that. There was no ATMs. So if you were out of cash, you had to try to pay with a check. And a lot of places would not accept checks. So sometimes you had to go to a different convenience store or a grocery store and have the grocery store cash your check, which basically means you wrote them like a $10 check on your account, and then they would hand you $10, and then that was cashing your check. But because of check fraud, that became harder and harder. And so basically, if you couldn't find a place to cash a check, you had to wait to go to the bank the next day when the bank opened. So just things were a lot different. So people carried a lot more cash with them. There was ways of paying for things called layaway. Layaway was huge in the 70s. So when I bought my really good guitar, I think it was like $400. Well, I didn't have $400, but that music store let people do layaway. And so I think I went in and gave the guy $100, which meant that they took the guitar out of the retail part of the store and they put it in back so nobody else could buy it. And then basically you would come in and you would agree on whatever the payment was, and you would come in on a regular, like weekly or monthly basis and make a payment. And once you paid the full amount for the item, they would give it to you. And then, so it could take, you know, sometimes 6 months to get your item. But a lot of stores even did that, department stores. So like at Christmas, if you went in and bought $100 worth of Christmas gifts, like let's say in early November, and some parents did it on purpose, they would put stuff on layaway, and that way those gifts for their kids would stay at the store and they wouldn't have to hide them in the house where the kids can find them. But you could put your Christmas gifts and stuff like that on layaway. People bought things through the Sears catalog. So if you didn't want to go into the store, really the only other way of buying merchandise other than going into a store and buying it was the Sears catalog. And so you would basically find items, people would pick items they wanted, and you would fill out these forms, and you would have to mail that form with a check to Sears, which took days and days for them to get, and then they would ship the merchandise to you, which took days and days, if not weeks, to get back. And so that was the only way of shopping other than going into a store. People actually mailed money in envelopes. A lot of kids bought things out of comic books and like different magazines, and so we would actually send cash in envelopes to pay for things. People mailed checks all the time. We licked green stamps, so when you go to a grocery store, for every $1 your parents spent, they got a green stamp. There was these green stamp books. You would lick the green stamps, and then once you got, let's say you got 3 full books, you would look through their catalog or go into the green stamp store, and there might be a blue manicure set for 2 books of green stamps, and so you would cash those in and get the item. But that was another way of paying for things. And a lot of kids use green stamps because a lot of kids didn't have a lot of cash. Houses, things that went on in houses in the 70s. A lot of homes did not have central air conditioning, and so a lot of homes had what we called water coolers. Some people called them swamp coolers, and basically it was a thing that sat on the outside of the house and had a vent sticking in a window, and you would put water in it, and this big spinning wheel would throw air into your house, but it would pick up moisture from the water that you put into the water cooler, and it would make your house really, really humid. But it would kind of cool it. You had to close your curtains. And then if you were in a bedroom and you didn't want to sleep with your door open and you didn't have an AC unit in your window, you basically put a fan in your window. So many, many summers as a kid in the 70s, I slept with a box fan in my window, and that's where a lot of people these days, older people that can't sleep without fan noise, it's because we grew up with fans in our windows as kids in the 70s. A lot of houses only had 1 bathroom and no shower, so there was a lot of fighting if you had a lot of siblings over the use of the bathroom in the morning. You had to take a bath, you had to get ready. It was kind of a pain. Didn't have, a lot of houses in the 70s had floor furnaces, which was a gas furnace that was kind of in the middle of the house on the first floor, and it was below the floor, and there was like a metal grate over it. And so, the heat would get so hot, it would force air up through it, which there wasn't a fan, but if you stood over the grate, you could actually feel the heat coming up, and it would get really hot. And so it would get so hot that it would burn your feet if you stood on it too long. And if you stood on it with shoes on the grate, it would melt your shoes. And so a lot of us kids in the 70s had tennis shoes with grate marks melted on the bottom of our shoes. Kitchens were a little different. Refrigerators did not have ice makers, and we did not have a huge amount of appliances. There weren't that many coffee makers. Most people boiled water on the stove to make coffee and tea. But to make ice, we had these, in the 70s, it was a metal tray, and you would fill it up with water and then put this divider, this metal divider in it, stick it in the freezer. It would freeze the water, and then there was this handle that you would pull, and it would break all that big ice chunk into smaller cubes. You'd dump those ice cubes into an ice bucket that was in your freezer, and you would hope somebody would refill it, because if they didn't, and you came home and you wanted a cold drink, you wouldn't have any ice because there was just no ice if somebody didn't refill the ice tray. And then freezers back in the 70s slowly formed ice, and so you would have to, every, 6 months to a year, you'd have to defrost your refrigerator we called them ice boxes. Me, and I still do today, I think. Growing up, it was an ice box, but basically you'd get a ice pick and a hammer out, and if you didn't want to wait on it to melt, you would chip it, and you'd chip all that ice off. Like I say, about once or twice a year. That's how you defrosted your refrigerator or your ice box. The sun and water, skin cancer was not a big thing for people in the 70s. We didn't really think about it, and so people didn't use sunscreen. We used suntan oil. We would oil, girls especially would oil their skin and then bake in the sun for an hour or two. Let me say that there were a lot more sunburns on people in the 70s than there are today. It seems like every one of my buddies and us, our noses, our heads, our shoulders, we always had sunburns all the time. There was no bottled water in the 70s. That was unheard of. If somebody told us in the 70s that at some point in the future people would pay for a bottle of water, we would have thought you were crazy. If we wanted to carry water with us, we carried a canteen. And so canteens were basically the way that we carried water. Most of us did not carry water. It was a pain. And so we would basically stop by whatever house we were close to and look for the garden hose. All houses had garden hoses stuck outside. We'd turn on their garden hose, get a drink out of their garden hose, and run on down the street. It didn't matter whose house it was. We never asked. We just stopped. Whoever had a hose out, and usually nobody ever yelled or complained. That's how we got water. Cars, inside of cars was a lot different. There were no, some cars did not even have car seat belts. The cars that did have seat belts, nobody used because seat belt laws were not in effect, and so nobody had to wear a seat belt. Playgrounds were dangerous. They had lots of playground equipment. We had really tall metal slides that in the summer, if it was like 105 degrees, would burn the underside of your legs as you slid down them. We had monkey bars that people would hang on to and swing, and if you fell, landed on the ground, you'd break an arm. We had merry-go-rounds that you could spin so fast that people would fly off, break a leg. A lot of very dangerous playground equipment in parks back in the 70s. School, if you got in trouble at school in the 70s, like really in bad trouble, you got sent to the principal's office and you got swats. There was spankings probably in school, grade school, junior high, and high school every day. I bet somebody got spanked every day. Gym class was mandatory. Nobody got out of gym class. We had to do a whole bunch of weird stuff in gym class, like learn to square dance, and you had to do, a lot of times had to do these weird things with parachutes where everybody held on to the end of it and it went up in the air and everybody got inside it, and goofy things like that. But the best part of gym class was dodgeball. We played dodgeball all of the time. I don't even know if kids are allowed to play dodgeball anymore. Very, very dangerous sport. But you had to buy a gym outfit. It had to be those funky little gym shorts that were like way, way high, and long gym socks that went up to your knees, and a gym shirt. And then after gym class, once you got to junior high and high school, you had to shower after gym class. And if you didn't want to shower, you still had to shower, because one of the teachers would stand there and watch and make sure you came out of the shower wet. And so that was always annoying. To get ready to go to school, you got to school, hour later you're in gym class and you had to take another shower. Movies, everybody loved going to the movies. If you wanted to see a brand new movie, you had to go to the theater to see it. There was no movies on television. There were no VCRs to record older movies that were on television. So if you missed like The Wizard of Oz, you had to wait a whole year to watch The Wizard of Oz again. There was no VCRs, no video stores, nowhere to rent movies. Video games did not exist. The only place you could watch or play a video game in the mid-70s was to go to an arcade. In the early 70s, there was no such thing as video games. There was pinball. We played pinball as kids, as younger kids. Social life, kids, of course, we did not have social media, did not have phones, did not have texting. The way that kids stayed in touch with each other if they weren't on the telephone was to go cruise the drag strip. And that's where people would meet and sit in a parking lot and talk and smoke cigarettes and drink a beer. Drinking age was 18 years old in the 70s, and cops were a lot more lenient. So if you got caught drinking beer at 18 years old in the 70s, you didn't usually get in trouble. You just got all your beer poured out. So that was a social scene. If somebody asked you a question or you had to do a paper and you didn't know an answer and your parent didn't know the answer, if you were lucky and you had a set of encyclopedias, you could try to look the answer up in the encyclopedia. If it just happened to not be in the encyclopedia, you had to wait and go to the library the next day and either read the books there in the library or check out books. We checked out books. We'd bring books home, and then they came with a little card in them which told you the date that the book had to be back. Almost everybody was late on getting at least one book back, and then you had to pay like 5 cents a day or 3 cents a day every day that your book was late. Crazy, crazy talk. Other things that we had to use in the 70s, when you wanted to take a photograph, you had to have a camera. Usually the popular cameras in the 70s for kids were 110 film and Polaroid. Now Polaroid took an instant photo. It was this big contraption. You took a Polaroid picture. This picture would come out the bottom and it was blank, and for some reason we would wave them like this thinking it would develop quicker, which it didn't, but there was chemicals in this little packet on the Polaroid film and it would develop the film right there in front of you. Now the colors weren't very good. The colors didn't last very long. The picture itself was kind of bulky, and so it wouldn't really go into photo albums because it would make the photo album wobbly, and you couldn't fold them, you couldn't stick them in a wallet. They were Polaroid. So basically, if you wanted to get some regular photographs, you took 110, you took that into a photo lab. The photo lab would say it'll be back in a week. So you had to wait a week or two depending on the photo lab, and then you get your pictures back. You have to pay a high price for them. And if you had a roll of 12 and 8 of them were blurry or bad pictures, you still had to pay for them. If you went on a trip, you had to use a map, a paper map. It was folded up in your glove box. And if you went through 3 or 4 different states, you had to have 3 or 4 different paper maps. That's how we got around, go to different towns, things like that. If you got lost and a place wasn't on the map, you had to stop and actually ask somebody for directions. If you wanted to send messages to people, you had to write letters. A lot of us had pen pals. To communicate back and forth with a pen pal could take a week or 2 to get the letters back and forth. If you wanted to see your favorite band, there was no MTV, there was no music videos. You basically watched shows like American Bandstand, Midnight Special, Soul Train, and Don Kirshner's rock concert. Those were our music videos. They were actually just live performances of the bands that we wanted to see. There was no YouTube, nothing like that. Most people, almost everybody, had to go to church on Sunday, and when you went to church, you dressed up. There was no jeans, there was no shorts. It was very uncomfortable shoes, nice dress clothes, and everybody went. Small towns, there were still racial divides in some small towns. Even in Enid, we had a pool for black kids and a pool for white kids, which was really weird. Didn't seem weird at the time, seems weird now. Almost nobody talked about gay people. I think for the longest time, didn't even realize there was gay people. And if you were gay, you didn't let anybody know about it. You did not have pride. You did not make a big deal out of being gay. And so we really didn't know which kids were gay in school. Language was a lot different. We said a lot of offensive things, which to us, again, was just normal. And I don't want to name off a lot of those things, but, you know, excuse me, even things like the N-word were on TV shows, on comedy shows, on television, in movies, which is really weird when you think about it. So anyway, a little bit different there. And then things that we feared, some of the big fears of kids in the 70s. In Oklahoma, it was tornadoes. You were afraid of a tornado tearing out your house or your school, but we were afraid of nuclear war. It was something that we thought was going to happen at any minute from Russia. We thought Russia was going to send nuclear weapons over. The upcoming ice age was something that we feared. There was no climate change. There was no global warming. It was an ice age. We were on the verge of an ice age. Quicksand seemed to be something we needed to worry about in the 70s. And the Bermuda Triangle. You did not want to get near the Bermuda Triangle in the 70s. So that is kind of what life was like for a kid in the 70s. Like I say, completely different than what kids are going through today. Today, there's more stress. Today, there's social media. You got a phone in your pocket, which isn't really a phone. It's a computer, a camera, an encyclopedia, a television, a video camera, everything. I mean, everything, all the technology, 10,000 times all the technology that we had in the 70s is now in that phone that I'm looking at right now in your pocket. It's just crazy, the difference. Songs, it just texting, you're never, you know where your friends are all the time. It's just a completely different world for kids than it was in the 70s. And so, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. I loved growing up in the 70s. We had complete freedom. As soon as we hopped on those banana seat bikes and we left the house, we were free to do pretty much what we wanted. We'd go to the creeks. Oh, we spent a lot of time in creeks, searching for tadpoles, salamanders, frogs, things like that. Our parents had no clue that we were down in the creeks, 2 inches deep in mud in our brand new sneakers. But yeah, so we spent a lot of time in creeks. We went to pawn shops all the way downtown. Our parents didn't know that we were hanging out in pawn shops. But you could go in there with a nickel and buy a comic book. And so that's where we got a lot of our comic books. So anyway, hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are a Generation Joneser or somebody from the baby boom generation, maybe even some of you Gen Xers, a lot of what I talked about was a little bit in the late 70s, early 80s, but basically by the end of the 70s, we had HBO and MTV, and there was just a lot more technology in the late 70s than there was in the early to mid 70s. So everything was starting to change and all that. But hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Hope I brought back lots of memories. I hope if you're listening to this and you're a little bit younger, hopefully everything I said made no sense to you and you had no clue as to what I was talking about. But let me know what you thought about the episode. Email me at buzz@buzzheadmedia.com. No, that's from another podcast. Email me at shags@shaggyduck.com or curtis@curtistucker.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast if you're listening. Don't forget that this podcast will also be on video on the Curtis Tucker YouTube channel. And then I embed this audio podcast and the video podcast on my blog at curtistucker.com. And then I also put a written version kind of highlighting what is on the podcast on curtistucker.com. And again, that's why I changed the name of the podcast. So now the Curtis Tucker podcast matches the Curtis Tucker blog, which matches the Curtis Tucker YouTube channel, which matches all of the Curtis Tucker social media channels. So I kind of pinky swear that I won't change the name of the podcast again. Rather, I'll just start a new podcast with a different name. This one should stay Curtis Tucker all the time. So thanks for listening. I appreciate you guys. I hope to get lots more episodes done this year, and it would be really cool to do so many episodes and get so many listeners that I could make money with this podcast and just do stuff like this all day long. So if you would like to be a sponsor or advertise or basically be the guy that supports this podcast, I'll talk about you every episode, hit me up and we can talk about that. But I will talk to you soon. See ya. Love ya.